So, yeah, so like I said, if I was a little late, it's because I was testing this out to make sure I actually
Oh,
know how
no,
to
I
work
was
it.
late.
So yeah, so it is May 19th, about 3:30. And I'm here with Miss Leontyne Peck. And just again, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today. So a lot of what I'm going to ask you, I think we maybe talked a little bit about in our first meeting, but I just wanted to make sure I had it, recorded and everything.
Okay.
So I was wondering first if you could just tell me a little bit about your family and where you were born.
Okay. Um, I was actually born in West Virginia
Hmm.
in a what I call them little villages, little
Hmm.
village communities. And I was born in the 1950s and specifically 1958 in Kaiser Hospital. It's just called the Kaiser Hospital. And so I am the fourth of five children born to my parents. And my early childhood was spent in Kaiser, West Virginia. And then when I was mm, probably seven or so, my parents divorced. And my father and my siblings, we moved to Piedmont, West Virginia, and which was just 5 miles away.
Hmm.
And so, and then our mother moved to Baltimore, Maryland. So we lived with my paternal grandmother and my father and my aunts and some cousins she had. My grandmother was the type of person that they don't make grandmothers like her anymore. I mean, they just don't. I mean,
Yeah.
she felt as though, my son fell on hard times. He has these kids. My parents were young, and so they're going to stay with grandma till they can work it out.
Hmm.
So we stayed with her, and so I grew. All of my formative years were spent in Piedmont, West Virginia, and like I said, the communities of Piedmont and Kaiser are just 5 miles away.
Hmm. So can
So,
you tell me a little bit? Tell me a little bit about the communities of Piedmont and Kaiser, just in the sense of one of the things we talked about was that when we think about Appalachia, we don't really think about Black communities or Black people existing there, or West Virginia, maybe more specifically. So can you just tell me a little bit about the communities there? Were they very big? And what were the racial demographics like when you were growing up?
um, Kaiser what was and still is the county seat of Mineral County, West Virginia. So it was a larger community. And when I say larger, maybe 15,000 people,
Hmm.
maybe at the most. Um, but it was more white than
Hmm.
black. There were a handful of black people there, and they mainly lived in a neighborhood that they called had a couple names, but one of the names was called Radical Hill,
Hmm.
Virginia Avenue. So that's where most of the black people lived, and there were other ones, dispersed throughout the community, but the majority lived in that neighborhood. Um, so it was rural, of
Hmm.
course. There were people that had farms, so we kind of knew our boundaries. We had little stores, and um, we played with neighbors. But that community was, I would say, was integrated early
Hmm.
because I had white friends there. Didn't really deal with a lot of racism as a child,
Hmm.
there. And I started the first grade in Kaiser. And then, but it didn't feel as close knit as Piedmont.
Hmm.
When we moved to Piedmont, um, although it wasn't purposefully segregated, I don't think initially, the community that I grew up in, there were two streets. One was Water Street and the other one was Paxton Street. And some point in time, I lived on both streets. And so that community, like at the bottom of the streets, was principally all black people,
Hmm.
all the houses, and then at the top end of the street were white people. But we played together,
Hmm.
and I didn't experience racism. My friends were black and they were white. You could come out and have
Hmm.
instant games. So I remember some of my they my cousins, but they were also my friends. You could come outside your house, and these houses were not fancy.
Hmm.
Some of them in today's, you would say, oh, that's their shack. Nothing was fancy, nothing. We didn't know how poor
Right.
we were from that, but nothing fancy. But the warmth of the community, we created our own entertainment. So, like if I would come outside and I would sit on my grandmother's steps, there were 10 other little girls. We'd have Barbie dolls and we'd play with the Barbie dolls. And, we couldn't afford the Barbie doll houses. And so, if someone got a refrigerator delivered or some appliance, that became Barbie's house. And so we
Right.
made a big house and got in there with Barbie. So, my friends, I went to school, and the one thing that I will say about Piedmont is that it was a walkable community.
Hmm.
Everything in the community. We had stores, we had bakeries, we had the schools, we had all the churches, we had dry cleaners, we had an opera house. And
Hmm.
even in our community, the first senator, not the first senator, but one of the senators from the U.S. senator was Gastaway Davis, and he lived in our community.
Hmm.
And then I found out later he even ran for, I think, president at one
Hmm.
point in time.
Yeah, interesting.
It was very now. So then we had a lot of professional people, doctors, and they lived what we called up on the hill. So we called the people that lived up, black and white people who lived up, the uppity people. Even though we went to school together, we socialized together, it was distinct in their housing stock, because our housing stock had looked like it'd been thrown together from emancipated slaves. Their theirs looked like it came from Europe's nobility, because there were mansions actually in Piedmont.
Hmm.
People and the feeling of the people was always, we were proud to be from Piedmont.
Hmm.
And so we walked to school together. Um, we had, I think one of the benefits that we had in our school was that, and when my father grew up there, the schools were segregated. So he went to Howard High School.
Hmm.
Um, and then once they integrated, we had Piedmont Elementary School and Piedmont High School. So, and really the high school was 7 through 12.
Hmm.
So we didn't have a middles. So, back to my friendships. I had most of the kids, as I said, the black kids that I played with, we were family. We just were, the community was populated by people who had moved there from Virginia, from other parts of West Virginia, from Maryland, but they were all in some way connected. And then they married, and people had a lot of kids. Like my grandmother was the mother of 8 kids, and most of the people on the streets had a minimum 5 kids. So there were tons of children.
Hmm.
And then the parents, most of my friends, black and white, but particularly, I'm focusing on black people now, had 2 parents. They had a mother and a father. And the main employer was what we called the mill. So my father worked at the mill. If you could get a job at the mill, that was a good job.
Hmm.
Then you had benefits, then you could have upward mobility. So the majority, if they didn't work in the mill, they worked for some shoot off from the mill.
I see.
And so we were working class,
Hmm.
very much working class. And so people could afford a car. We had our churches there. The hub of the community was the school. Again, we could walk to school. The school had plays, and we had state renowned basketball teams that, won state titles from the very beginning. But one of the things that I think was very unique and distinct about our educational system was that our parents were very involved in our education, and that many of the teachers who were there um, they were spouses or they had relocated there, um, and they had an affiliation with West Virginia University through Potomac State College. So we got teachers who were master's degrees. Some, were working on their PhDs, or maybe they even held their PhDs. So we were encouraged. I mean, really from second grade. I started second grade there. That when you grow up, you want to go pursue higher education. That was instilled in us, and so as Black children. So many of the Black children who I went to school with went on to higher ed,
Hmm.
at least for an undergraduate degree. Now maybe some of them didn't finish, but they were always encouraged to do
Yeah.
that. So it was really a warm, um, engaging type of community where you could go into people's homes and borrow food or eat food. But it was walkable. That's what you could walk anywhere. Like if I wanted a donut, I could go get a donut. Or every weekend we had a theater called the Majestic Theater, and so but they played the same movies the whole time. So kind of went to play. So I saw plenty of Elvis Presley movies
Okay.
and plenty of Beef Like and Bingo movies, and Sidney Poitier movies.
Okay.
It's interesting. So I became a Sidney Poitier fan at a very early age because I saw all of his movies in the Majestic, and I think it was 75 cents to get in. It wasn't very expensive. But before the movie, they had like a little concrete floor, and at the base of the screen, and we danced. And so they put on, and so we danced to the Beatles and whoever out, Aretha Franklin, James, whoever was the popular one. But I remember one of my friends, and she's still a friend. Her name was Shelley, and Shelley said, "White people have no rhythm." So she's kind of suggested that we have only Black people songs and only Black people could dance. Then we sit down, and then the white people could get up and dance, because she said we can't dance to your music. But the owner's like, nope, nope, nope. You're all kids. You're just gonna have to dance. So, but she's like, well, they can't dance and they're getting in our way, and especially that Sue Ann. She's doing the monkey, and so so. But it was, we were children.
Yeah, of course.
But it was a very warm. I had a great childhood growing up in Piedmont. I really did.
Interesting. And so, and yeah, and thank you for sharing all this. And I have a few things or a few questions that are kind of coming to me now. And one of which I was really interested in the fact that all the children at least like knew of college as an option, and that
Mm-hmm.
you were kind of encouraged to pursue higher education. Could you tell me a little bit about your experience of higher education then? As you approached graduation, yeah, what was your plan and where did you end up going?
Okay, sure. My like I said, from second grade, our teachers would drop those little hints like, when you grow up and and you go on and you finish high school, you have to have good grades. And so that was instilled in us. So by the time I finished elementary school, like they wanted us to have good grades. And so for us, from in my family, A's meant money. So for every A that I got, my father would give me $1. So it meant money, not just to me. And then one of my friends, she was white. Her name was Jeannie, and Jeannie was an extremely smart girl. And she got straight A's all the time. And so I wanted to be like Jeannie. And Jeannie and I became good friends, and we studied a lot together. And I struggled with math. Everything else I could do.
Hmm.
Well, we ended up in the seventh grade getting a teacher in the seventh grade, and her name was Mrs. Knopfsinger. I'll never forget her. She's now gone on, but she was the person who said everyone can learn math. I was like, I have problems with this. So she taught me some little techniques. And so with her help and with Jeannie's help, I was able to understand it, get so
Mhm.
I wasn't like an A math student, but I was at least like a B student. And then I ended up winning. They had this like local competitions, like your county competition for math, and I took it, and I won the competition.
No
I
kid.
was shocked. Everybody in the class was shocked. Like, but not math, and I still have my award for it. So I won the county math test, and then that gave the school bragging rights.
Hmm.
And then I went on, and I was always challenged. My teachers, and I didn't have a black teacher until I think I was might have been the seventh grade or eighth grade, but her name was Shirley Coleman. And Miss Coleman was our phys ed and health teacher. And I remember being so excited about her coming because I had never had a black teacher.
Hmm.
And I remember sharing this with my father, and he didn't seem to be as excited as I was. And he said, well, the reason I'm not is all my teachers were black. That was my first understanding of really what segregation was. And he
Hmm.
said, and so my teachers were gone. I never had a white teacher. I couldn't understand that. So my teachers, I was a good student. I loved learning. Um, and they did track us. So I was in the college track.
Hmm.
And my grandmother was very influential because her children, for whatever reason, they had to drop out of school. So her older children dropped out of school to work, some of them. And then the younger ones, like one of my aunts, she got pregnant, I think her junior year. And then back then they wouldn't let you come to school. They kicked you out of school. So that interrupted her learning.
Hmm.
So she wasn't able to graduate. So my grandmother she had out of her 8 children, only one, her son Victor, who graduated from high school. So, but she had cousins who she had grown up with, and she encouraged me. She said, I want you to graduate from high school. And so I mean, that was definitely something I was planning on doing. So I graduated at the top of my class.
Hmm.
Um, and I got scholarships. I applied to regular schools. I applied to, in West Virginia, which I call regular schools in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And then I applied to Ivy League schools. And so I even applied to Harvard, and I was provisionally admitted. But before going, they said, well, you have to go to a prep school. But that was I was like, no, I want to go to like real college. I don't want to go. So the money was the issue. I couldn't go because of the money.
Hmm.
And so anyway, I decided to go to West Virginia Wesleyan.
Hmm.
I went there for one semester, and I met a, a student there. Um, and I said, I don't want to be in West Virginia anymore. And I'm studying um, political science. And he said, girl, you need to be in DC. How do I get there? So I applied to all the schools there, and I really wanted to go to Howard.
Hmm.
But my father thought that Howard would not be a good fit for me because it was too urban.
Hmm.
And I had grown up in this little teeny town, and he thought, I don't think that's a good fit for you. And you're young. I'm not thinking about that. So anyway, I was when we went to American University's campus, he said, this is a perfect fit for you because
Hmm.
it was more cloistered. So that's where I ended up going to undergraduate school, and it was a good fit for me. But Washington D.C. was really the good fit because I love D.C.
Hmm.
And that was my first experience really living in a city. I'd never taken a bus before, so riding on the bus. And then my roommate was from New York, and she was wondering why I had the accent that I had, and I was wondering about her accent as well. We got along well. She taught me a lot about city life, and that was a great experience. It was a very, very good experience for me.
Hmm.
But I think that not just myself, but my classmates and the people who came before and after me in Mineral County schools have been encouraged to pursue higher education.
Hmm.
So unlike maybe the rest of other communities in West Virginia, that might not be the case. But in our county, it was. So I want to share this one example, because I think it's important. Because I wanted to go to college, one of the things that I was thinking about was foreign language. And at Piedmont, they didn't offer, um, we had French, and I took French. But the counselor recommended that I also take Latin.
Hmm.
And we didn't have Latin at our school. So the neighboring school, Kaiser High School, had Latin. So the principal, who was very young and, you know, forward thinking, said, well, if you can provide your own transportation, you can go to this school.
Hmm.
And that's what I did. So I was the only student to this day who, in Mineral County, I went to all three schools. I went to Piedmont High School, Kaiser High School, and the Career and Technical Center,
Hmm.
because I needed to learn how to type. I thought I was going to have my own secretary, which
Right.
I did later on. But my typing teacher said, "You're not. Who's going to type your college papers? You're not going to have a secretary for that." Like, oh, wasn't that far advanced, thinking. So I think to this day I was the only student, and I never felt like that I was an affirmative action case, or we have to help this student because she's Black. No, this student is gifted, and
Mhm.
she's coming to us asking for help. We need to provide it. And so the only thing your dad needs to approve, sign this, that you'll be. And so I did.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Inter-
I went to all three high schools.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so something that I wanted to circle back to was you had mentioned like the mill being the kind of economic center of your town. And when I talk to my students about West Virginia, like the first thing they think of is coal, like, right away. And so was the coal industry very kind of big in your area?
Yeah, the coal industry was too. But it was in a different part, like Western Maryland, that part of Western Maryland,
Mhm.
and then towards like Grant County and Pendleton counties. So we had some in Mineral, but it really wasn't as big as the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Mill.
I see.
That mill, because it was physically located in the state of Maryland, but because geographically the mill was located on the Potomac River in between Westernport and Bloomington and Maryland, Piedmont, West Virginia, they built a bridge so you could walk across the bridge from Piedmont to go to
Mhm.
work. You didn't have to even drive to work. You could walk to work, and that was the major employer for years. And I mean, it just closed recently. It hasn't been closed that long.
I see.
And so generations of families worked there. We had something that we continue, at least in the Black community. Um, the mill supported a Labor Day picnic, and it was segregated. There was one for whites and there was one for Blacks.
Mhm.
And people that had grown up, in Piedmont and Kaiser, at least for the Black community, every Labor Day they would come home. And wherever they were living, they come back in their shiny Cadillacs, and and their nice clothing, and it was a great time. Everybody had a good time. So when the mill integrated it, when the law passed that you could no longer segregate, people didn't go. They didn't want it. They're like, we don't want to go to the fairground. We want to go and do our own thing. So the white community didn't continue theirs. The Black community continued it, only they involved, local people and local places like the VFW and the American Legion, and people who had grown up in the community, and they still have it. COVID interrupted it for a little bit, but now it's back on track again because they came back to see their family. It's a really important social event, but a connecting event. Yeah. But the mill was like, so for example, the mill also had a social aspect to it. So they had a place called the Devon Club. And in the Devon Club, they had a bowling alley and a theater, and you could go buy food and buy all these things. And so if your father, your parent, you could even be a mother who worked for Westvaco Corporation. They had a number, so you could call. I could call my father and say, "Hey, can you bring us some ice cream home?" And so he bring us little Dixie cups, or we could go in there if we knew his number. We
Right.
said, "Could you put this on our data tab?" And then when he would get paid, he'd say, "Wait a minute, I didn't approve. All this ice cream coming. I got bills to pay. I'm paying the Devon Club way too much." And then they also had housing. Now, housing was located in Westernport. It was company housing. And I don't know of any Black family that ever lived there.
I
If
see.
there were, I didn't know about them. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, but a lot of white families right across the river in Westernport, they lived in company housing. But the mill was the economic engine
I see.
for the community, hands down, no question.
Yeah. And so I might be skipping ahead a little bit here, but I wanted to make sure we get to your kind of collection of local history and family history and your decision to write it down. So could you just maybe take me through where did your interest in your local history and in your family history come from?
Okay. It started really, I think, when I was about in the fourth grade. I had spent a lot of time, as I mentioned before, with my grandmother. And my grandmother in her bedroom, she had this picture of a woman above her bed. And I'd say, "Grandma, who's that?" Because she looked like a white woman. And I said, "Grandma, who's that woman?" And she said, "My mom." And I said, "Well, what's her name?" And she told me they called her Lee. And I said, "Okay." And so she said, "But my mom died. That picture's really important to me because she died when I was a baby." So that always stuck in here. So I felt sorry for my grandmother because she didn't have any siblings that I knew. Well, she didn't have any siblings. And but she seemed to have a strong family. Like we would visit people, but these people I found out much later doing the family research. I didn't know this till I did the research. Was that they were her first cousin. So when her mother died, my grandmother was about two. So, I'm thinking baby, baby, but she was two.
Mhm.
And then her uncle, her mother's brother and wife, took my grandmother and from Madison County, Virginia to Piedmont and raised her. So that's when my first interest came,
Mhm.
just in who am I really? And so then fourth grade, when I asked about, was in class and we were studying history, and that particular session was on slavery. And there just happened to be a picture of Henry Clay in there. And I asked my teacher, and I was known to be the kid in the class, always asking questions. Like, we can't move forward because you got all these a bag of questions. And they called me gay. That's back home. That's what they, because gays got all these questions to ask. I need to know. That's why. So I asked the teacher, and she said she didn't think that Henry Clay was related to me. But part of me said, "I don't know." So then I asked her if he could have owned my people,
Mhm.
and she gave me the affirmative. So then it made me even more curious. Well, then life went on. Really wasn't that interest, and it wasn't that I was interested. It just I had stuff going on in my life like most people. But
Mhm.
when my daughter was born, my first daughter, you get those baby books and you have to fill out stuff. And it's like, nice answer to that question. You call my grandma and find out. So Whitney, my daughter, my oldest daughter, will be 40. And so when she was born, my grandmother, who both of my grandmothers were midwives, and this particular grandmother, she loved, both of them loved children, but Grandma Laura was closer to. So she came to visit me because she had to come and see the baby and to make sure I knew what I was doing. Because she's like, I had to check, make sure you know you got a baby. You sure you know what you're doing? I really didn't know what I was doing, so I needed her to come. Like, I hope this baby survives. How often do we have to feed this? It's crying all the time. Stop crying. So, so grandma came to visit me. We lived in the DC area. And it was the first time that I kind of had a relationship with my grandmother as an adult and
Hmm.
as an adult woman. And so I brought out Whitney's baby book. You know, we were very comfortable. And I said, Grandma, I need to ask you the names of your parents and of granddaddy's parents. So she gave me the names, and my great grandfather's name, my great grandfather, his name was Washington Clay
Hmm.
from, but I didn't know where he was from. She just said Washington Clay, and she said, and his wife's name was Amanda Clay. And the reason that Amanda stood out is because one of my father's sisters, her middle name was Amanda. So she had been named in honor of her grandmother.
Hmm.
So I had that kind of locked in my mind. And then fast forward 25 years, I moved to Virginia. And it's a place I said I would never move to because I was taught in the fourth grade that Virginia was the Confederate state and it was the enemy
Right.
of West Virginia. That's what I was taught.
Hmm.
So I said, I'm never going to move to Virginia no matter. So then my husband decides, well, that's kind of nice. Let's move there. So here we are, 23 years. Well, when I started doing the research is when I moved to Charlottesville.
Hmm.
And I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, the year that my grandmother died. And right before I moved, my aunt Sheeny, the one named Amanda, she said, I would like for you to write mom's obituary. So I started writing the obituary, and I was, sitting at her kitchen table, and I looked up her and I said, I just want to make sure that I have this right, that grandma was born in Piedmont, West Virginia. And she said, no, grandma and granddaddy were born in Kriglersville, Virginia.
Mm.
And that just amazed me because I thought all along that they were from Piedmont. They weren't even from West Virginia, they were
Right.
from Virginia. And that's when it started. So the genealogy history bug got a hold of me and it hasn't let me
Hmm. I know
go. Yeah.
that
And
kind of
then when,
work can do that. Yeah.
yeah, I haven't, it won't let me go. I'm still on the hook.
Yeah.
So I connected those dots with Henry Clay and my second great grandfather. His name was Henry Clay as well. And because I had the name Washington Clay from that conversation of my grandmother, when I started the history and went to Madison County to start doing the research, the clerk showed me um, the marriage certificate of Henry Clay, excuse me, of Washington Clay and Amanda, and then it had Henry Clay as his father on there. So in 5 minutes, I found two sets of my
Hmm.
grandparents, great grandparents. It
Yeah.
was awesome.
It's fascinating.
I started crying.
Yeah.
I really, because I felt as though they had been whispering in my ear since childhood to say, we need to bring you back to your roots. We have elected you as the Clay Family Deceased Society. You can't see us, but we can see you.
Yes, indeed.
We've designated you to pull all of this together for this time and for the future.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've been doing for over 20 years now.
Yeah. And do you think that's maybe one of the things that motivated you to initially like write the books that you wrote?
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely.
Mhm.
And I think the motivation came from what if I'm not here? Who's going to tell the story? So and I have more stories in when I wrote Paxton Street, I have a lot more stories to write. Some of them I wanted it to be soft because if you write books and people, even if the because all of my life wasn't roses. I mean, I have had a lot of difficulties in my life, but I didn't want to upset people in the community by writing things that they're like, "That's terrible what you're saying."
Yeah.
So I wanted to engage them in stuff that was positive because it was mainly positive. But I wanted to tell the story for future generations,
Hmm.
but especially for my kids and for any children that would come through them. Um, that growing up in West Virginia for me was a really unique and positive experience. And then once I left West Virginia or Appalachia, I saw how people thought about people from Appalachia.
Yes, indeed.
To be from there, I was like, I'm not from West Virginia, I'm from DC. DC, it don't matter what part, it's just DC, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
because I saw people would say to me, well, you seem like you're more like from New York,
Hmm.
not West Virginia. You can't be from West Virginia. And so I had to make a decision about my identity to say, no, I am from West Virginia. And now I say specifically, people ask me now and I'm traveling or something, I'll say I live in Virginia because
Hmm.
that's and I've been here. And actually lived here as long as I've lived in West Virginia. But my true roots and my formative years were in West Virginia. We're in
Hmm.
Piedmont, and I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah. And so you mentioned a little bit about, yeah, like wanting to preserve the stories because if something, God forbid should happen. When you wrote your books, how did you imagine them like circulating? Did you just want to write them and then give them to people that you knew and loved, or did you imagine just them kind of circulating wherever they ended up circulating? What was your thought? Yeah, just about how the books might be used.
That's a good question. And the first time that I tried my hand at writing, I thought, well, I need a publisher. So let me go find a publisher. And so you submit, and this was years ago. This didn't even have, I think I wrote like a little novel or something years ago. I can't even remember. But I kept getting all this rejection.
Hmm.
We're not looking for this kind of blah, 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 this. And so I was like, I don't deal with rejection very well because I read other books and I think my book is better than that one. And taking my book. Wait a minute, Oprah. You know. So I experienced that early on. So then I thought, and this was right after college because I never fancied myself as a writer. I just thought I have something to say. But I thought that was a traditional route to take is write something,
Hmm.
put it in someone else's hands, and then let them decide if it's good or not. But I knew with the model that I was doing with our mother's dresses and Paxton Street that I was just going to self-publish
Hmm.
and market it myself because I didn't want someone else to say, I don't think that's good enough. Or here's the tour, here's the publishing schedule. We'll give you the advance, but this is what you have to do for us. Well,
Right.
I don't want you to have that control over me. I would rather market it myself. And I was very successful in doing it. So I took my books, I contacted libraries or people that I thought would be interested in the subject,
Hmm.
and all of them were. And so then I would take the books, have a signing, and I went. The publishing house that I used was called Lulu Publishing, and so Lulu Publishing had a deal with Amazon,
Hmm.
and then they pay you quarterly, so I don't have to do anything. So I'm not looking for this to get rich or famous. I just want the information to get out there and to kind of encourage other people to tell their stories because I know there are people who self-publish that do very, very well,
Hmm.
very well. So if you can, and then I had a website. I don't have the website anymore, only because that's another phase that I'm not saying it might not come back, but I do better work with like other types of social media.
I see.
My website was a little more stagnant, and I said, well, if you want my book, here's a go to Lulu or come to me. I even mail it to you.
Hmm.
Um, so there was just other ways that were faster, and then people would find me and they
Hmm.
contact me and they say, hey, we're the library in Berkeley Springs or wherever it happens to be, and we'd like for you to send us a couple copies, and how much they cost. So I just found it that I could control the narrative and that I could control my marketing and my schedule.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned this Lulu Publishing. Is this the publisher that you used for all your books?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so could you just maybe take me through like start to finish? What did that relationship look like?
It was in the very beginning. I did my genealogy book not through Lulu. And the reason that I didn't do it now, it's available through Lulu now,
Hmm.
but initially I didn't. I went through the ancestry world to do because they had all my documentation there and it was easy to pull it together.
Let's see.
So I had them um, upload all my data, and then I had who was my mentor. His name was Julian Burke. He helped me to bring all of my materials together, and then once we could do it, we could upload it to another publisher if we wanted to do that. So initially, when I started to do, um, my genealogy book, Silver Children, um, I just published it myself. I had them send it to me, and then I took it with me. And
Hmm.
then I added it to my Lulu collection.
I see.
And then what I had to do with them is give them the file so they could format it, to add. So it's there now.
Hmm.
But the other two books was totally done on Lulu. And it was difficult in the very beginning because you have to learn how stuff formats, how the pictures format,
Sure.
how, if you go over too many words, it spills over. It's like, oh my God, technical stuff too. And there really is not someone you can call. That you really can't call someone and say, hey, can you help me format? You can send them like, do you have a problem? Email it to us. Email, no, I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So, but they were like their tech support was and is good. You can contact them, but it's just not that easy. They don't just put the number up there and say call us.
I see.
You do. You put it under, like you fill out a ticket, and then they'll get back with you. So the first book that I did, it was a little more difficult because it was technical.
Hmm.
I was inserting pictures and dates and things that didn't fit, and then if that picture didn't fit I had to go back and reformat it, or so it became like a puzzle piece.
I see.
And one of them, I think it was our mother's dresses. The site crashed and I lost all my work.
Oh no.
Yeah, I lost everything, and I was sick for about a week.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and I said, "Isn't this thing saving it?" Nothing was saved. So I
Oh,
had like and I had to redo it all over again.
oh my
So
goodness.
you have to really lay out what you're going. So the next book, I made sure that I kind of had it scaled out exactly how I wanted it. And
Hmm.
it didn't have as many pictures, so it was a little easier.
Yeah.
But I found Lulu Publishing. And I didn't even use all their services because they had marketing services. They still do.
Hmm.
Um, they had a way, for them to pay you. It was easy. It was a very easy process. And I'm sure there are other publishers out there. I just haven't used them, but Lulu was easy for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you tell me, there are three books I'm familiar with. Forgive me if there's others. So it sounds like Silver Children is like you said, like genealogical, just a lot of like records and those kinds of things. So how is that book different from your later two, from Our Mother's Dresses and Paxton Street?
Now, the genealogy book, Silver Children, I wrote that so that I could remember my ancestry trail.
Hmm.
And I knew that that would be something that would be changing, because each time someone's born or someone dies or married, the records change. So
Hmm.
I try to preface that and to say, this is what I'm dealing with this time and space. And so when you get this, you're going to have to still double check it,
Hmm.
because I'm getting records all, although they're reliable sources, they change too. So for Silver Children, I just, the first couple of pages, I imagine myself um talking to people who are no longer here to give me answers, just to give a little fun to the book, you know. But
Hmm.
it mainly is about my side of the Clay family, and that people that in this community of Piedmont and Kaiser and Petersburg and Cumberland, that area, who are related to me through blood. Some I knew, some I did not. And then other people that got the book and read the book, they said, "Oh, I didn't know that so and so was related to me." So that was more um, during a period of time when genealogy and research and family stuff was really starting to wake up. So I
Hmm.
feel blessed that I was kind of like on in the very beginning of doing, merging the technology and getting the information out to
Yeah.
people. Now, the second book, Our Mother's Dresses, I wrote that principally because I wanted to encourage. There were so many people that I know that don't even know the names of their grandmothers.
Hmm.
They don't know their grandmothers. I can see your great. You don't know the name of your grandmother? No, I don't.
Hmm.
I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it, and it was more common than I thought. So that's why I wrote the book. And so then it made me think about not just my grandmothers, but their mothers. Of course, I didn't know my great grandmothers. What do they look like? Who do I descend from? Um, were they black? Were they white? Were they mixed? And so what I found out is that I come from, because my people have been here for so long in this country, from a lot of different people.
Hmm.
And that's important to recognize, to say that I'm not just a black woman. I identify as a black woman, but I have women in my DNA structure who were from Europe, who were from England, who were from, they did not identify as black women, but I'm one of their descendants.
Hmm.
So I thought that that was important, to like more truth telling, to say you can identify a certain way, but if you roll back the cover, this is who you are a combination of a wide variety of people. Yeah. So I wanted to tell that story and encourage other people to do it as well.
Hmm.
And then Paxton Street, I wrote that because I wanted a little levity in the writing. And sometimes when you tell people these stories about when you grow up, they're like, "That didn't happen to you." So they don't know that my mom would have pig feet parties. And
Right.
it, like, pig feet. Before I grew up, they eat. So I wanted to really, again, there's a whole lot more stories like that. Or um, some of the things, like, I talk about in, and this didn't even happen in Appalachia, but it was one of my experiences. My best friend, the woman who was from New York City, and my roommate, she died from anorexia.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made, on purpose, I don't have chapters or like little stories, like 2 or 3 pages of stories,
Hmm.
because I wanted to be easy to read. Um, and the title's called Vomit,
Hmm.
because that's what she did all the time.
Hmm.
And she would gag herself. And I never experienced anything like that. And when I lived in Texas for a while, and and then I relocated back to DC, and she lived in New York, and I called to speak with her, and she had died.
Mm.
And I didn't know. So, I connected with her mother, and then I went to New York and visited her gravesite. but those are the kind of experiences that I had that I wanted to share with other people about grief. You know, some of these things are serious and they're hard, and we all probably, if we haven't gone through them, we are going to go through them, and how you survive, how
Mhm.
you get through, and I can always hear my father's um, voice and says, you always have to get up and you always have to live for the next day.
Mhm.
Cannot
Absolutely.
not give up. My father's rules, you can't give up, you cannot give up, that's not acceptable, and you only have 2 days to be sick.
Yeah. Oh, I hear that. I hear that. So,
That's sick rule.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, if this is too personal, please feel free to not answer, but I am curious about people who write their own life stories that I'm sure that can be, on one hand, very enjoyable, but on another hand, very, very difficult. I mean, just as you said, we all have, a plethora of experiences. So, can you just tell me a little bit about what did it feel like putting your kind of life and family history out there? Was it, yeah, just what were some of the emotions that you felt?
Some of the emotions were raw. When I wrote about my sister, um, I didn't really want to do that, writing about her, but I thought it was important because my younger daughter never knew my sister. She died
Hmm.
before she was a baby when she died. And then my oldest daughter was very close to my sister. But I gave a story of my sister when I wrote her story. I have a whole lot more, but I couldn't write the other ones because it was too, um, I won't even say painful. It was just, it was a place that I felt sorry for my spirit because I miss her. But I also want people to know that she was here,
Hmm.
and that she was a lot of fun. But her story is complicated because my sister had to take on, at a very young age, responsibilities for children because our mother, my mother lives with me now, and they don't, people don't sometimes don't like to tell the truth. And they put on a mask and they have a masquerade.
Hmm.
And I'm not one of those individuals. You just, as you get older, you have to own it, whether it's good, bad, or you just have to own it and say, I did this. This was bad. I have to move on. But
Hmm.
there may be consequences. And so, with my sister being the firstborn, she and I did not have the same father. But my father adopted her, and my mother had her before, she had the rest of us. So, and there's 5 years of difference in age between my sister and myself. But my sister was a classic, I'm in charge of everybody here. Because she had to be. She had to be like the mom. And I'm so thankful for her, because when I was a kid, I was like, you're not bossing me around. You're not my boss. And and she was like, no, I don't want you to end up how I ended up. I
Hmm.
was a teen mom. It's not easy being a teen mom. So, I mean, and I did not put this in the book, but this is just an example of something that I feel stronger now that I could do, is that she was the first person to tell me about birth control,
Hmm.
and not just birth control, but consequences of, sexually transmitted diseases, without sugarcoating any of it. She said, we can't, there's certain things in life we can't sugarcoat. You just have to get the hard facts.
Yeah.
But my sister was also known to be a party girl. She liked to party,
Hmm.
liked to drink, she liked to smoke weed,
Yeah. Yeah.
but she was very smart. But she did not get the opportunity that I got. Like, I was known as a star pupil.
Hmm.
My sister, because she was a teenage mom, she couldn't finish school. She eventually got her her GED, and then eventually became a paralegal. But that, but during that period of time, young girls were shunned. And so she ended up going into a life that she could have had a better life and making choices that maybe she wouldn't have had to have made if our mother had stayed with us and if circumstances had been different.
Hmm.
And having said that, now that my mother lives with me, um, I'm glad that she didn't raise us. I'll just put it that way,
Hmm.
because it probably would have been worse.
I see.
So I'm glad that things happen for a reason, and sometimes you might not know the reason until many, many years later.
Yes,
So
indeed.
that's kind of where I am now. So when you write about yourself, you want to put on a really nice facade, but deep down there's hurt, there's pain, there's anger, there's good things, but there's also those other things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So it's cathartic in many ways. And when you talk to other people, I find that you're not the only one who's had these experiences.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for sharing all this with me. And I don't want to keep you too long. I'll just keep you talking all day because this is so fascinating. But I do have just a few shorter questions. I think about three, and then I'll let you alone and maybe bother you later on. But one of them is just about how many copies of your books do you think are circulating, if you had to put a number on it?
Good question. You mean all of them total?
Yeah, just in total, or if you know specifics for specific titles, just
I
whatever
would
information maybe comes to mind.
I would say maybe a couple hundred.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe a couple hundred.
Yeah.
Not thousands, I wish.
Do you
Would be
think it's?
great.
I was gonna say, yeah, we'll get the word out, and hopefully we'll up those numbers. Yeah.
And I would say a couple hundred. And the reason I say that is because whenever I did the presentations, I took the books with me.
Hmm.
I controlled the sales of them.
Yeah.
But then if people order them from Lulu,
Hmm.
uh, I'll get a check or I'll get a
I see.
deposit into so I can say how many. So I
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
and that might be maybe once a month, two or three books sell.
Yeah.
Because now it's been a while,
Yeah.
but I would say maybe a couple hundred
Mhm.
with all of them.
And do you think a majority of them came from like your traveling around, or do you think most
Oh,
of them
yeah,
came from? Okay.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of the sales were from my own marketing. So, for example, um, I belong to the Clay Family Society. And
Hmm.
so I know a lot of the members because they're Clays, they'd be interested. So there, right there is probably 50 books that have sold
Yeah. I see.
within. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the marketing was intentional.
Yeah. And so you mentioned obviously like the Clay Society, and I think you said sometimes libraries would kind of have
Oh,
you. Yeah.
yes.
So yeah, what other kind of marketing events like that have you done?
Most of when I started doing the marketing for Silver Children, I would take the other books later on with me so people could buy all three if they wanted.
Hmm.
Um, so I would take them, autograph them, and sign them. So I knew if I was going to, let's just say, like Charlottesville Library, and they'd say, well, yeah, I'd say, well, about how many people will you have there? Well, we're going to have 30 people. So I'd bring 30 books, and most of the time I would sell all of the books.
Hmm.
So um, wherever I went, and then the libraries purchased. So West Virginia University, the genealogy societies, Library of Congress. I
Right.
mean, you put your books there. So they're all there within that particular um, circle of people that would be interested in that type of writing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I
Because
see.
it's not, my books are not, now I could say that probably Silver Children would be a quick read for anyone. They're just little stories um, from Piedmont, West Virginia, through my eyes. The other ones are more specific.
Right.
So not really related to the Clay family, that wouldn't probably appeal to you as, but you might want to say, this is how I might want to put my book together as
I
an
see.
example. Yeah.
Yeah. And then is there anything you're working on right now?
I haven't had time.
Yeah.
I would love, and I would love to. I think that I'm going to start writing more, but it will be stories um the same as Paxton Street.
I see.
I feel like I held back in not writing. Um, I just have to find the time.
Yeah. I know that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, to do
Mhm.
it. So, but but I want to.
Yeah. Well,
I
I don't
want
want to
to.
be too nosy, but when you do start, please let me know because I'd be curious to
Well,
hear,
yeah.
yeah, just what you're working on. So there was two more things, and then, like I said, I'll let you go. The first of which is I'm curious or interested when I talk to people who've self-published. I think most everybody has tried to go that traditional route that you mentioned, where they submit, and then more often than not, you get rejections. I mean, that's what I'm finding as a writer, you're mostly getting rejections. And I'm just curious, do you happen to have any of those old rejection letters or anything?
Probably have maybe one,
Oh yeah,
maybe because normally when they would come, I was
yeah, right.
like, "Rejected me again, garbage, you go."
Yeah, yeah,
But for the three that are out there, I self-published. I didn't even think about. I
right.
sent them to no one because
Hmm.
I'm like, self. It's just kind of the same way with my film,
Hmm.
um, Clay 1613. People will say, "Oh, well, or who's your producer?" "Oh, I'm going to go get David O. Selznick to be." you know, did it myself,
Hmm.
and I had someone who was more prolific or more, but it didn't work, so I ended up getting someone who
I see.
understood what I needed. and
Hmm.
and I kind of compare that with book writing. And if it's because there are some books and some films that have been produced independently, and they're excellent, a lot of them.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And the last thing I wanted to circle back to, I think we talked about this in our first conversation, and you mentioned it a couple times now, but just the thought of you and your community as Appalachian. I think you'd mentioned that wasn't really something that you had considered until maybe recently. So, yeah, could you tell me a little bit about your relationship with this idea of Appalachia and where you fit in relation to it?
Yeah, I never saw. Let me just, for me, I'm very comfortable with seeing my identifying as a Black woman.
Hmm.
I'm very comfortable identifying as a citizen of the world. But I never saw myself as a Black Appalachian because I think because of how I never really saw West Virginia, even though I knew, I never saw West Virginia, my part of West Virginia,
Hmm.
as that. And I say Appalachian.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I never saw that part of it. And I think maybe because I was in it,
Hmm.
And so, like, my mother and her friends and the people where I grew up, they said we're country or we're hillbilly.
Right.
So if people want to call me a hillbilly, I'm okay with that because that's what they call themselves. But being what do they call it? Or is it Appalachians and Appalachians? I think
Yeah.
there's a term.
The
And so,
Appalachians, yeah.
yeah, I don't reject it. I
Mhm.
just was not familiar with the term until
Yeah.
recently. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think I may have um, heard it or maybe saw some kind of conference, but I never really, it didn't stick.
Right.
And I think because people couldn't believe I was from West Virginia. I
Hmm.
was like, oh, I grew up in West Virginia. I worked at WVU. I went to graduate school at WVU, but I still never affix that, and it's not something that I think is negative. I just never saw it,
Yeah.
never recognized it until people said, "Yeah, that's so." It'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. I don't have a problem with that.
okay, I was going to say that's good to hear because if I end
Yeah,
up writing about this in my book, I don't want to offend or anything like that.
yeah. I have no problem with identifying at all.
All
And
right.
especially, since I learned, and it was my husband who told me. He said,
Mhm.
"Well, because see, my husband's from Maryland,
I
so
see.
he always tries to put West Virginia down."
Right.
And
Of
I have to always defend West Virginia
course, of course. Yeah.
every time. So he says, "Yes, those are the hillbillies in country," and I get that. But then he said, "Do you know the only state that's fully in?" And again, I say Appalachia
Uh-huh.
is West Virginia.
Hmm.
And I
Absolutely.
and I didn't know that till he told me. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
So,
have no problem with that.
okay, good to know. So, but yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't want to keep you too long, but thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your stories. It's just, I learned so much each time we talk, so I really do appreciate it.
Good. No problem at all. And anything I can do to help you, let me know.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure I'll be reaching back out. So
Okay. You enjoy your time off.
I will. I'm gonna try to anyway. So,
Yes,
but
definitely.
again, thank you so much, Miss Peck, and I'll be in touch.
Sounds good.
All right,
Uh-huh.
you take care.
Bye
Bye bye.
bye.